Just wanted to review the context of the readings and then to kind of dive a little more deeply into the message I'd like to bring about from the gospel particularly. But just remember the flow of Lent. If we go back even, and again, most of the time, the readings that the church really focuses on connecting, and not that the second reading isn't worthwhile, but it's usually a little separate from the theme, are the first reading in the gospel. And so the first readings, we've been walking through the different main figures this year, in year B, of the covenant in the Old Testament, right? We started first year, I won't quiz you, I know it's early, right? But first weekend we had Noah, remember? And then last weekend we had Abraham, and now we get Moses. The continued development of this covenant relationship, probably the most classic image we think of with the old covenant, which is the Ten Commandments. You know, how we're called to live in right relationship with God and with neighbor. One way I heard it referred to recently I thought was kind of fun. It's our family covenant. And so it's the first three commandments relate to how we are to relate to our Father, and the next seven are how we're supposed to relate to our siblings, right? To each other. So God and each other, to love of God and love of each other, neighbor. So we see that developing. In the Gospels, we just kind of walk through some of the significant moments in Jesus' life, temptation in the desert, of course, transfiguration last weekend, and now we have the cleansing of the temple. Now, interestingly enough, if I were to ask you, when does the cleansing of the temple happen in Jesus' public ministry? Beginning, middle, or end? Again, I won't quiz you, but if you take a second to think about what your thought would be. Oh, you guys are ambitious this morning. You're still sharing. I'm impressed. So this one is at the beginning. John is John chapter 2. Did you notice that? So he has it at the beginning. The reason you're confused, I know, is because the synoptics all have it at the end. It's for the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's the incident that really is the final straw that leads to his arrest and the Paschal mystery, the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. In John, he has him coming at the beginning. Some of the great saints and scholars and theologians, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, suggest it happened twice. He did it once at the beginning, once at the end. Nonetheless, and it's significant because it's one of the few incidences, other than those main fundamental things of Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection, and etc., that appears in all four Gospels. The only other moment of ministry, the feeding of the multitudes, the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. So again, suggesting this is significant. If all four gospel writers still felt the Spirit calling them to include it. And one of the things that I think we learned from it, we learned from this moment of the gospel, the cleansing of the temple, I think, is a lesson that I kind of learned when I went on to become a special education assistant right out of college. I never had younger siblings, so I never had to really deal with or cousins. I was the youngest cousin on both sides of the family, so never really had to deal with trying to be a part of disciplining younger children, right? And but here I was, a special education assistant, and I found that eventually I wasn't good at it. And it was eventually a little bit of what I would like to suggest is justified anger that helped lead me to being courageous to setting boundaries and setting limits for these 10 to 14-year-old boys that were in my charge. Whereas, initially it was more of, kind of being walked over a little bit, okay? And this is something all of you as parents, that our parents you had to figure this out, right? And certainly teachers, how we deal with that balance of mercy and love, but also, justified anger that can, again, I think that's Jesus here is showing some just anger. What was going on in the temple? The equivalent that I kind of thought of, and I was kind of proud of myself, was if we had Thanksgiving, when we bring our food for Thanksgiving, and we donate it to the poor, if we were to say, well, you know what, we're going to have a little store in the back, and we should try this. We're going to have a store in the back, and we'll have you come and buy the food you can donate, but then we're going to mark it up really high and make a profit. Should we try that? But that's essentially, what they were doing. It was becoming more convenient not to bring your sacrifice, your animal, from home, and so they started selling them right there in the temple. But what? They were making, undue profit from it. And the temple, and the Sanhedrin and the religious people that are supposed to be helping with the sacrifice, kind of making money off of the people. And so that was the biggest motivation. So here Jesus allows that just anger to say, okay, this needs to be confronted, and you need to wake up. And he realized me just coming in here and saying, you know what, this might not be the best idea, is not going to be what really gets the attention of the people. And unfortunately, it got their attention to the point of wanting to eliminate him. But they had the choice. Were they going to respond to this just anger and change, or were they just going to silence the just anger? And of course, they went the silence route. But so that can be part of our motivation. But the challenge with us, Jesus is able to find the perfect line to allow the anger to lead him to just anger and not unjust anger. You and I being disordered and broken, what happens? Our just anger can easily spill over into unjust anger. We can go beyond what we need to do. Again, many parents I know that even I've talked to that struggle with that. That the kind of we let our emotions get us to that point of not just having a just anger confrontation with our children, but we let it spill out into a little excess. And this is where we have to keep asking the Spirit to help us to find that balance. And obviously, when we do go over that line, to be willing to seek forgiveness and recognize when we've done it and not just justify it as necessary. So this is where it gets, it gets a little gray at times. And again, this is what brings us to the Holy Spirit. The life of virtue that we're called to demands us living in the Spirit. There's no other way about it. And so Lent is a time to be renewed in that Spirit, to say, Lord, help us to find these lines and help us to be courageous. If there are areas in my own heart in life that I need to get a little just anger with and say this is unacceptable, I need to change enough already. Or if there are areas and things and injustices around me, in my family, my community, my workplace, my country, my world, to say, Lord, help me to have that grace, to allow the maybe just anger to lead to courage to address these things and to call for change. And again, we can't call for it outward if we're not still willing to recognize and call ourselves out for change inward. And in so doing, hopefully, through sometimes mercy, forgiveness, sometimes through just anger, we can continue to help the world come to this place of peace and justice that God desires and we know that we so woefully fall short of.